Number 1. The Griffin. The year is roughly 700 BCE. You're crossing the Gobi Desert with a caravan of Scythian traders, somewhere on the ancient trade routes that would one day become the Silk Road. The wind never stops out here. The sand moves like it's alive. Then you see it, half buried in a ridge of red sandstone, bones. Not scattered, arranged, almost like a skeleton still holding its shape after thousands of years of wind erosion. A beaked skull, 4 clawed limbs, a body the size of a large dog, but built low and strange, like nothing walking the earth today. You've never seen anything like it, and you won't forget it. Here's the mystery. For over 2,000 years, ancient Greek and Scythian accounts describe a creature guarding gold in the deserts of Central Asia. A beast with the body of a lion and the head and wings of an eagle. The Griffin. Historians dismissed it as pure fantasy, just another mythical guardian invented to scare off treasure hunters. But then in the 1990s, folklorist Adrienne Mayer proposed something that changed the conversation completely. She pointed to the Gobi Desert, specifically the region ancient traders would have crossed to reach gold deposits, and matched it against something else entirely. Paleontological dig sites containing the fossilized remains of Protoceratops, a beaked, 4-legged dinosaur that lived roughly 75 million years ago. Protoceratops had a sharp, curved beak, a quadrupedal frame, a bony neck frill that, when partially eroded, could resemble folded wings. And its fossils are found in exactly the same gold-bearing regions the Scythians mined. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part is the timing. Ancient nomads had no concept of dinosaurs, no science of extinction, no 75 million year timeline. All they had was sand, wind, and bones eroding out of red cliffs that looked, to the naked eye, like nothing they'd ever seen alive. So they explained it the only way they could. A guardian. A monster. Something that protected the gold because it was clearly powerful enough to have survived out here, alone, for longer than memory. And here's where it gets even stranger. The Griffin motif doesn't just appear once. It shows up in Scythian gold jewelry, Greek pottery, Persian palace reliefs spread across a region spanning thousands of miles for over 1,000 years. Every single depiction shares the same core anatomy: beaked head, quadrupedal lion body, some structure that resembles wings. Why would completely disconnected civilizations, centuries apart, keep drawing the same creature? Unless they were all looking at the same evidence. We may never know exactly which fossil bed first inspired the legend. The Gobi is enormous. The bones are still out there, eroding, one grain of sand at a time. But the next extinct animal on this list didn't just inspire a myth from a distance. It became one of the most famous monsters in all of literature, and its skull is sitting in museums across the Mediterranean right now. Number 2. The Cyclops. The year is somewhere in antiquity. We don't know exactly when, and that's part of the mystery. You're a farmer on the island of Sicily, digging into a hillside to expand your field. Your shovel hits something hard, not rock, bone. You keep digging. It's a skull, but it's enormous, bigger than any human skull you've ever seen. And in the center of the face, where 2 eyes should be, there is one single massive hole. You don't have a word for extinct dwarf elephant. You don't know what a nasal cavity is. All you know is what your eyes are telling you. This was once a giant, and it had one eye. Here's where it gets strange. That single hole isn't an eye socket at all. It's the nasal opening, the space where an elephant's trunk would have attached. On a living elephant, this passage sits above 2 small eye sockets on either side of the skull. But on a fossil, weathered and buried, those side sockets often erode away or go unnoticed. What's left staring back at you is one giant centered hole. The elephant in question is Paleoloxodon falconeri, an extinct species of dwarf elephant, sometimes only a meter tall at the shoulder, that once lived on Mediterranean islands including Sicily, Malta, and Cyprus. Geologist Othenio Abel first proposed the connection in 1914. That these dwarf elephant skulls, discovered for centuries across Sicilian caves and quarries, directly inspired the legend of the Cyclops, the one-eyed giant that Homer immortalized in the Odyssey nearly 2,800 years ago. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part is the scale of misinterpretation. A dwarf elephant skull is already unnervingly large compared to a human head. Ancient Sicilians, with no knowledge of elephants, an animal that had gone extinct on the island roughly 11,000 years ago, had no reference point at all. They weren't looking at a small elephant. They were looking at proof that giants once walked their land. And here's the twist. Caves containing these skulls in Sicily and Crete have also produced other large fossil bones, legs, ribs, vertebrae, creating what would have looked to ancient eyes like the scattered skeleton of something enormous and humanoid. So the myth wasn't built from a single misunderstanding. It was built from an entire buried ecosystem of misread evidence. Which raises the bigger question. How many other giants, dragons, and monsters in ancient mythology started the exact same way? Not as lies, but as honest attempts to explain something real. We're about to find out, because the next creature on this list isn't just inspired by a fossil. It's inspired by fossils so massive, so widespread, that they helped shape the folklore of nearly every civilization on Earth. Number 3. The dragon. The year is 300 BCE. You're a scholar in Han Dynasty China, and a farmer has just brought something to your door wrapped in cloth. He found it in a riverbank, he says, after a flood exposed the earth. He didn't know what to do with it, so he brought it to you, because you study the old records, the old bones. You unwrap the cloth. Inside, a fragment of bone, curved, dense, and strange. And then more pieces. A tooth the size of your palm. You've seen this before, not this exact bone, but bones like it. Farmers across China have been finding them for centuries. They call them dragon bones. Here's where it gets strange. For over 2,000 years, Chinese apothecaries ground these bones into powder and sold them as medicine, believed to carry the essence of dragons, creatures of immense power in Chinese mythology. But paleontologists now know exactly what these dragon bones actually were: fossilized remains of dinosaurs and other prehistoric megafauna, eroding naturally out of riverbanks and quarries across central and eastern China. In fact, some of the very first scientifically documented dinosaur fossils in China were discovered specifically because collectors were sourcing dragon bones for traditional pharmacies, and modern paleontologists followed the exact same supply chains local farmers had used for generations. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part is what happens when you lay these bones out. A sauropod's elongated neck vertebrae, stacked end to end, can stretch for meters, a long, serpentine spine unlike anything in the local animal kingdom. Add curved claws, oversized teeth, and skulls with strange crests, and you have every core feature the Chinese dragon still carries today. The long, snake-like body, the claws, the horned head. And here's what makes this bigger than one country. This wasn't isolated to China. In ancient Greece, fossilized mammoth and giant deer bones were displayed in temples as the remains of legendary heroes and monsters. In medieval Europe, museum-like collections of dragon and unicorn bones, actually whale, mammoth, and rhinoceros fossils, were kept in royal cabinets of curiosities as proof that dragons were real. Every culture, isolated from every other culture, arrived at strikingly similar monsters, because they were all excavating the same category of evidence: the fossilized remains of animals larger, stranger, and older than anything alive in their world. Someone, somewhere, always found the bones first. Then the story followed. But the next creature on our list didn't come from ancient farmers. It came from something far more recent and far more official. Number 4. The Thunderbird. The year is 1977. You're in Illinois, and two boys have just run into town claiming something impossible happened in their backyard. They say a bird, an enormous bird, wings wider than a car is long, swooped down and tried to carry one of them away. Local news picks it up, then national news. The story becomes one of the most famous unexplained cryptid sightings in American history: the Lawndale, Illinois Thunderbird incident. Here's where it gets strange. The Thunderbird isn't a new legend. Long before 1977, indigenous peoples across North America, from the Pacific Northwest to the Great Plains, told stories of a massive, supernatural bird whose wing beats caused thunder and whose eyes could flash lightning. It appears carved into totem poles, painted on shields, described in oral histories passed down for generations. So where did the idea come from? Paleontologists point to a very real, very recently extinct bird, Pterotornis mariami, a giant condor-like scavenger with a wingspan estimated at nearly 3.5 meters, roughly the length of a small car, that lived across North America until as recently as 10,000 years ago. That's not ancient by fossil standards. That's recent enough that early human populations on the continent may have coexisted with these birds directly, watching them ride thermals over canyons and circle above megafauna carcasses. But that wasn't the strangest part. Pterotornis fossils have been recovered from sites like the La Brea tar pits in California. Hundreds of individual specimens, remarkably well preserved, giving researchers an unusually detailed picture of a bird whose living relatives, the condors, are already considered massive by modern standards. A bird this size, casting a shadow like a passing cloud, would have been unforgettable to early humans. And if oral traditions carried the memory of that bird forward for thousands of years, even after it vanished, you get a legend that outlives the evidence entirely. And this is where everything changes. Because if a 10,000-year-old bird can survive in cultural memory long after its extinction, with no written language to preserve it, what other extinct creatures might still be hiding inside oral traditions we've dismissed as pure fantasy? The Thunderbird's official records list it as a myth, but the bones say something showed up, and it was real. Number 5. The Rock. The year is 1830. You're a French naturalist working in the highlands of Madagascar, and local guides have just led you to something they've known about for generations but rarely show outsiders. Fragments of eggshell, half buried in the red clay. You pick one up. It's thick, heavier than it should be, and then you see the scale of it. Reconstructed, this egg would have been larger than a basketball, larger than anything laid by any bird alive today. Here's where it gets strange. For centuries, Arab traders returning from voyages along the East African and Indian Ocean coasts told stories of an enormous bird capable of carrying elephants in its talons. The Rock, immortalized in 1001 Nights in the tales of Sinbad the Sailor. Marco Polo himself wrote about hearing reports of the Rock during his travels, describing feathers supposedly 12 paces long. The bird responsible for the legend, researchers now believe, was Epiornis, the Madagascar elephant bird. Flightless, over 3 meters tall, weighing up to 500 kilograms, and laying the largest eggs of any known bird, extinct or alive. Eggs with a volume roughly 160 times that of a chicken egg. But that wasn't the disturbing part. Epiornis likely didn't go extinct in some ancient, unwitnessed era. Radiocarbon dating on some remains suggests these birds may have still been alive as recently as the 10th to 13th centuries, meaning Arab traders visiting Madagascar's coastline may have encountered living elephant birds, or at minimum their freshly laid eggs, and carried the story back across the Indian Ocean. A flightless, elephant-sized bird can't carry off an elephant, but a traveler describing an egg the size of a boulder, laid by a bird taller than a man, doesn't need to exaggerate much before giant flightless bird becomes giant bird that snatches elephants from the sky. And here's the bigger mystery. No one knows exactly when the last Epiornis died. Some researchers argue human hunting and egg harvesting drove them to extinction. Others suspect the final population survived in remote highland forests far longer than we assume, which means somewhere in Madagascar's interior, there may still be undiscovered nesting sites, untouched, unexcavated, waiting. The Rock was never a myth about flight. It was a myth about something enormous that should not have existed and did. Number 6. The Unicorn. The year is 1663. You're in a limestone cave near Quedlinburg, Germany, and workers have just uncovered something that will end up on the desk of one of the most famous scientists in Europe, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. A massive skull. A single, long, spiraling horn socket at the front. Leibniz examines the bones and reconstructs, on paper, a creature standing upright on two legs, a unicorn made of fossilized bone. Here's where it gets strange. He was wrong about the posture, but he wasn't wrong that the bones were real. The animal responsible was Elasmotherium sibiricum, sometimes called the Siberian unicorn, a giant rhinoceros species that stood over 2 meters tall at the shoulder, weighed as much as 5 tons, and carried a single massive horn on its forehead, likely over a meter long. For decades, paleontologists believed Elasmotherium went extinct roughly 350,000 years ago. But that wasn't the twist. The twist came in 2018, when a research team analyzing collagen from Elasmotherium fossils in Kazakhstan revised the extinction date dramatically, pushing it forward to as recently as 39,000 years ago. That means Elasmotherium was very likely alive at the same time as early modern humans across Eurasia. Overlapping, possibly encountering each other directly across thousands of years in the same landscapes. And this is where it gets bigger. Ancient cave art across Eurasia includes depictions of large, horned mammals that some researchers argue don't match any known living or recently extinct species cleanly, reigniting old debates about whether early humans directly witnessed and recorded animals like Elasmotherium before it vanished. If true, the unicorn wasn't born from imagination at all. It was born from memory, a genuine encounter, retold for tens of thousands of years, slowly reshaped by every generation that could no longer verify the original sighting, until a 5-ton rhinoceros became a slender, graceful, horse-like beast in medieval tapestries. Somewhere between the cave wall and the tapestry, the truth got smaller. And stranger. Number 7. The Sea Serpent. The year is 1845. You're standing on a dock in New York City, where a traveling exhibitor has just unveiled something he calls the Hydrarchos, the ruler of the sea serpents. A 35-meter skeleton, articulated bone by bone, drawing enormous crowds willing to pay for a glimpse. Here's where it gets strange. The skeleton is real. The animal is not what he claims. The bones belong to Basilosaurus, an early, fully aquatic whale ancestor that lived roughly 34 to 40 million years ago, growing up to 18 meters long with an elongated, serpentine body dramatically different from any modern whale. When 19th-century fossil hunters first began pulling Basilosaurus vertebrae out of the ground in Alabama and Mississippi, some assumed they'd found a marine reptile, a sea serpent, because the vertebrae were so elongated and snake-like that a mammalian whale ancestor seemed impossible. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The showman who displayed the Hydrarchus skeleton had padded the exhibit with extra vertebrae from multiple individuals to make the creature appear even longer and more monstrous than it really was, turning a genuine, already strange fossil into an outright fraud, one that scientists at the time publicly condemned. And yet, the underlying animal was real. And its skeleton genuinely resembles the sea serpents described in maritime folklore for centuries. An elongated, undulating body moving through open water, unlike anything sailors could otherwise identify. Here's the bigger mystery. Sailors across multiple centuries and multiple oceans reported strikingly similar sea serpent sightings. Long, segmented, snake-like bodies breaking the surface in rolling humps. Some cryptozoologists argue these sightings describe large groups of dolphins or whales swimming in a line, misread from a distance as a single, undulating creature. But others point out that elongated whale ancestors like Basilosaurus prove nature has already built exactly this body plan once before, meaning the ocean doesn't need mistaken identity to produce something that looks like a sea serpent. It's already done it. The only question is whether anything similar might still be swimming in waters we haven't fully explored. The deep ocean remains one of the least mapped environments on Earth. More of the seafloor has gone unexamined than the surface of the moon. Which brings us to our final creature, one that didn't come from Europe, Asia, or the Middle East at all. Number 8. The Bunyip. The year is 1846. You're near the Murray River in South Australia, and a partial skull has just been pulled from the riverbank, presented to colonial naturalists, and then, remarkably, shown to Aboriginal elders for identification. Several of them immediately recognize it. They call it a Bunyip skull. Here's where it gets strange. For thousands of years before European colonization, Aboriginal oral traditions across Australia described the Bunyip, a powerful, dangerous creature said to inhabit swamps, billabongs, and riverbeds, capable of dragging the unwary beneath the water. Paleontologists now believe the Bunyip legend is connected to the fossilized remains of Diprotodon optatum, the largest marsupial known to have ever existed, roughly the size of a hippopotamus, that once roamed Australia in massive numbers until as recently as 40,000 years ago. Diprotodon fossils are common across river systems and dried lake beds throughout the continent. Precisely the kind of watery, muddy terrain the Bunyip is said to inhabit. But that wasn't the disturbing part. The disturbing part is the timeline overlap. Aboriginal peoples have inhabited Australia for over 60,000 years, meaning it's entirely possible that early Aboriginal communities coexisted directly with living Diprotodon populations, not just their bones. If that's true, the Bunyip may not be a myth built from fossils at all. It may be a genuine cultural memory, passed down generation to generation for tens of thousands of years, of an actual living animal that vanished from the landscape but never fully vanished from the stories. That would make the Bunyip, potentially, one of the oldest continuously surviving oral memories of an extinct species anywhere on Earth. And it raises a question no paleontologist can fully answer. How much of what we call myth across every culture on this list is actually memory? Degraded, reshaped, but rooted in something that genuinely happened?